Okay, so you've given us some really interesting stuff to dive into today. Excerpts from Chet Holmes' The Ultimate Sales Machine.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the book jacket calls him America's greatest business growth expert, which, you know,
It's a bold claim, right?
yeah, but when you actually start looking at his ideas
Mm.
and, his philosophy, it actually it really resonates.
It does.
It's all about focus.
Yes.
Honing in on those vital few skills that really make a difference rather than, spreading yourself too thin across a million different strategies.
Right, so we're basically looking at doing less, but doing it better.
Yeah.
Right, that's the immediate takeaway.
Yeah, and I think what's important to remember right from the start is that this isn't just about like simplifying for the sake of it.
Yeah.
Holmes actually had this like deep understanding of business growth.
Oh, yeah.
He worked as a corporate trainer and a strategic advisor with over 60 Fortune 500 companies.
Wow.
Huge names like Pacific Bell, NBC, Citibank, Warner Bros., and a ton more.
Yeah, I mean, that's a serious track record.
It is. And, he's designed hundreds of advertising campaigns and sales systems across all sorts of different industries.
I mean, it's clear that he really knows his stuff.
Yeah. And he even had clients who paid him fees exceeding $2 million.
For a single client.
Yeah, for a single client. So clearly he's got some serious real world experience that, kind of lends a lot of weight to these ideas.
Definitely. And, it's interesting because it's not just business acumen that we're talking about here.
Right.
Like, he spent 23 years studying and teaching karate,
Oh, wow.
which is actually the perfect illustration of his point about mastery through repetition.
Yeah.
Dedicating yourself to those core skills and just practicing those fundamental movements over and over again.
I mean, it's the same thing he's applying to business, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And thinking about your goal of like quickly becoming well-informed on these crucial business topics,
Yeah.
Holmes is kind of offering a shortcut here, right? He's saying like, instead of trying to learn everything, focus on these few core strategies.
The things that really move the needle, yeah.
Exactly. The things that will actually have a disproportionate impact.
The 80-20 rule, right.
Right. So our mission, if you will, in this deep dive, is to really go through these materials and extract the essential insights about boosting business performance
Yeah.
by concentrating on these core strategies. Like the subtitle of the book itself kind of says it all. Turbocharge your business with relentless focus on 12 key strategies.
It's very direct.
It is. So today we'll be looking at a few of these in particular.
Okay.
First off, the crucial difference between tactical and strategic thinking,
All right.
especially this idea of the 1% executive that he talks about in the chapter, Becoming a Brilliant Strategist.
I'm interested to see where he goes with that one.
Me too. We'll also explore education-based marketing
Okay.
and this really cool concept he calls the stadium pitch, which is all about attracting the right buyers.
And establishing that credibility, right?
Exactly. Then we'll look at how to understand and potentially even shape what your market considers important when they're actually deciding to buy something.
Interesting. That's like getting ahead of the curve.
It is. And then we'll be on the hunt for that smoking gun, that unique piece of market data that just sets you apart from everyone else.
The thing that makes you stand out. Yeah.
Exactly. And finally, we'll tackle this idea of pig-headed discipline
Okay.
and how you can really execute these strategies relentlessly.
So throughout all of this, we're going to cut through the noise and really focus on those core principles that Holmes emphasizes.
That's the goal, because we want to avoid feeling overwhelmed
Right. Exactly.
by the sheer volume of business advice that's out there.
Which is a lot these days.
It is. So let's just jump right into that first crucial area, understanding the difference between tactical and strategic approaches.
All right. That's good.
So in the Becoming a Brilliant Strategist chapter, Holmes outlines 3 types of executives:
Okay.
the tactical executive, the strategic executive, and this rare combination, the 1%.
I like how he breaks it down into these categories.
It makes it so much easier to understand, and then you can figure out where you are or where your team is and where you might want to evolve to.
Yeah, where the gaps are.
Exactly. So first, let's just define what a tactic actually is.
Okay.
It's essentially any short-term action that's aimed at an immediate gain.
The quick wins.
Yeah, so things like running an ad campaign, sending out direct mail, making those sales calls, attending trade shows.
Gotcha.
Then you have strategy, which is like the big picture plan.
Right.
It's that detailed roadmap for achieving a long-term goal and ultimately, your desired position in the market.
So it's about where you want to be,
In the long run, yeah,
not just today or tomorrow.
exactly. And what Holmes really emphasizes is that The real power comes when you can align your tactics with your long-term strategy.
Okay, so they have to work together.
They do. And he's constantly asking this question: how many strategic objectives can this single tactic help us achieve?
Right, so it's not just about doing things, it's about making sure they actually contribute to the bigger picture.
Exactly. So it's kind of a question for you too, right? Are your daily activities just generating those immediate results, or are they also contributing to something bigger?
It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day, for sure.
It is. Now, Holmes says that about 90% of executives are primarily tactical.
Okay.
They're so focused on closing that deal today.
The here and now?
Right. And they don't often have a strong grasp of those long-term strategic implications.
They're not seeing the forest for the trees.
Yeah, and he uses this classic example. If the sales team is having a hard time getting appointments,
Okay.
the tactical executive solution is just to tell them to try harder.
Which, it doesn't really address the root of the problem.
That doesn't?
Like, why are they having a hard time getting appointments? Is it the messaging? Is it the target audience?
Exactly.
There could be so many different factors.
And then you have those strategic executives.
Okay.
They make up about 9%.
All right.
And these are those visionary leaders, the ones with a global perspective.
Right.
They can develop those high-level strategies.
They can see the big picture.
But here's the thing. They often lack the practical skills, or maybe even the interest in actually implementing those strategies.
So the ideas are great, but getting them done is a whole other story.
Exactly.
So their plans, they can fall apart because they just can't execute them effectively.
Yeah, and Holmes even says that these types of executives often need to partner with someone.
Who can actually get things done.
Right, who's a strong tactician.
Yeah.
That can really help to bring their visions to life.
It's a good point because it highlights how, strategy without execution is just an idea.
It is. So for you, it might be about, recognizing if you're strong on vision, but you need to make sure you've got the right people in place.
Right, or the right systems.
Yeah, to actually make those things happen.
Because otherwise it's just a nice idea that never goes anywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then finally, you have that 1% executive.
Okay, the unicorn.
Yeah. This is the rare individual who combines those big, innovative ideas, that strategic thinking, with the tactical ability and the discipline to actually implement them effectively.
So they can not only see the big picture, but they also know how to get there step by step.
Exactly.
It's like having the best of both worlds.
It is. Now, even if you don't naturally excel at both of these things, Holmes makes a really good point.
Okay.
He says that understanding both perspectives is crucial.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Because if you're a strategic thinker and you're partnering with a strong tactician,
Yeah.
you need to be able to communicate your vision clearly.
Right.
And also understand the challenges of implementation.
Because otherwise you're just setting them up to fail.
Exactly. So to illustrate this difference in action, Holmes shares this compelling example
Okay.
about this new magazine that's trying to attract advertisers
Okay.
in this really crowded market.
How crowded are we talking?
Over 80 other publications, all vying for the same ad dollars.
Oh, wow. So it's really competitive.
Super competitive.
Yeah.
Now, the purely tactical approach here would be to just tell the salespeople, go out and sell more ads.
Right. Which, on the surface it makes sense, but it doesn't really address the underlying issue.
It doesn't. But the strategic shift that they made was brilliant.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
They actually changed the salespeople's titles.
Their title.
Yeah. So instead of something like sales representative,
Okay.
they made it something less overtly salesy.
Like what?
Something like director of corporate communications.
Oh, that's interesting.
It is.
Yeah.
Because it reframes the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. We're not coming in as someone trying to sell them something right away.
Exactly. So now, instead of immediately launching into this pitch about advertising rates,
Yeah.
the director of corporate communications could start the conversation more broadly.
How so?
Saying something like, hi, I'm Jennifer Smith from XYZ Magazine. We're always looking for ways to better understand the needs of the market. And I also work with our editorial team to identify potential stories that would be relevant to your industry. So I was curious, how has the current market been treating your business?
It's a much more subtle approach.
It is. It's all about building that relationship,
Yeah.
establishing rapport before you even mention advertising.
So you're building trust first.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it creates that natural opening to talk about industry trends,
Yeah.
potential editorial coverage.
And then more organically, how advertising could fit into their overall strategy.
Exactly. And by doing this, they're actually hitting multiple strategic objectives, right?
Okay. Like what?
Building that relationship, establishing trust, and even creating an opportunity for what Holmes calls education-based marketing.
Okay. Which is something we'll get into a little bit later.
We will. But here's the really interesting part.
Okay.
Holmes talks about how a purely tactical salesperson would probably resist this entire approach.
Oh, really? Why?
They would be thinking, why do I need to do all of this relationship building and market research when all I want to do is sell them an ad?
They're so focused on the immediate sale that they're missing the bigger picture.
Exactly. And that resistance really highlights the fundamental difference in mindset.
Right. The strategist is thinking long-term, holistically,
Yeah.
and the tactician is just focused on that immediate transaction.
Right. So let's bring this back to you for a second.
Okay.
When you or your team engages with a client or a prospect,
Yeah.
what are all of your strategic objectives beyond just closing that deal?
That's a good question.
It's a really important one to consider, right?
Yeah.
Are you also trying to build respect, foster trust, generate future referrals?
Right, because those are all valuable in the long run.
They are.
Yeah.
Are you trying to preemptively address potential price competition? Position yourself as an expert.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Increase your influence. Cultivate brand loyalty.
Even creating a sense of urgency for them to buy sooner rather than later.
Exactly.
There's a lot more to consider than just making that one sale.
There is. And Holmes actually gives this really powerful example
Okay.
about two furniture stores that opened around the same time.
Right.
The first store was purely tactical. The salespeople were just focused on selling furniture in that moment.
Okay.
And over 4 years, they experienced some growth.
But it was probably pretty modest, right?
Modest, incremental, yeah.
Okay.
The second store, however, while they were also aiming to sell furniture,
Yeah.
they had this one key strategic objective:
Which was?
to sell the store itself
Okay.
and build brand loyalty through buyer education.
Oh, that's interesting.
It is. So the management was constantly training their salespeople to talk about the store's history, the owner's commitment to quality, their service, their competitive pricing.
So they were giving them more than just product knowledge.
Yeah. They were teaching them about the brand, the value.
And the expertise of the staff, right?
Exactly, like furniture construction and design.
So it was about building that relationship with the customer.
It was, not just completing a transaction.
I bet it paid off.
It did, big time. So over time, this second store, they cultivated this really loyal customer base.
People who kept coming back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when people in the community needed furniture, they automatically thought of this store.
Because they had those good experiences and they trusted the brand.
Exactly. So after 4 years, the tactical store was still just one location.
Yeah.
But the strategic store, they had expanded to 6 locations.
Wow. That's a huge difference.
It is. And, Holmes emphasizes that customers are often willing to pay a premium
Okay.
when they perceive greater value.
Beyond just the product itself.
Right. So things like superior service, expert advice, a trusted relationship.
They're not just buying a product, they're buying an experience.
Exactly. And that allows you to avoid competing solely on price.
Which is huge these days.
It is. And this is a real aha moment for me, right?
Okay.
That simple shift in focus, consciously adding 1 or 2 strategic objectives to every interaction, like building brand loyalty through education
Yeah.
or selling the overall value proposition of the business, can lead to really different long-term outcomes.
It's about playing the long game.
It is.
Not just going for the quick win.
Okay, so let's move on to another really important part of Holmes's philosophy.
Right.
The power of education-based marketing
Okay.
and this concept of the stadium pitch.
I'm curious about that one.
It's really cool. So the basic idea here is that you will attract far more of the right buyers
Okay.
by proactively teaching them something valuable.
Instead of just trying to sell them something, right?
Right.
It makes sense when you think about it from the customer's perspective, right?
It does.
Like, who are you more likely to engage with? Someone who's constantly pushing their product or someone who's offering helpful insights that can actually improve your business or your life?
It's a no-brainer, right?
Yeah.
And that's where the stadium pitch comes in.
Okay, so what is that exactly?
He uses this analogy. Imagine all of your ideal customers are gathered in a stadium,
Okay, I'm picturing it.
and you're on stage, right?
Okay.
What would you say from that stage to keep them engaged and interested?
To make them not walk out, yeah.
Exactly. And Holmes argues that whatever title or core message resonates in that stadium, what keeps people in their seats?
Okay.
That's the exact same approach you should be using in your advertising, your direct mail, your website content,
Even your sales conversations, right?
even your sales
Right,
conversations.
right.
It's about figuring out what really hooks people.
And then using that consistently across all of your marketing efforts.
Exactly.
So the key to crafting an effective stadium pitch is really understanding your audience, right?
It is. What are their biggest challenges? What are they most curious about?
You have to really know what makes them tick
And your title, it needs to grab their attention immediately
by addressing a pain point,
or promising a valuable insight. Yeah,
something that makes them want to lean in and hear more.
exactly. And to illustrate this, Holmes brings up this really important statistic.
Okay, what is it?
He says that only about 3% of your potential buyers are actively buying now.
3%? Wow, that's small.
It is. And then another 7% are open to considering options. But a massive 90% fall into categories like not thinking about it,
Right.
think they're not interested, or even definitely not interested.
So if you're just focusing on the buying now crowd, you're missing out on a huge opportunity.
Exactly. So if you step onto that stadium stage
Yeah.
and your whole pitch is, we have the greatest office equipment in the world, buy now,
You're only speaking to that tiny 3%.
and probably alienating the other
I
90%.
think you're immediately turning them off.
You are. But then he contrasts that with a much more strategic title
Okay.
for an office equipment company that's targeting CFOs.
All right.
And the title is The 5 Ways You're Wasting Money in Your Operations and Administration.
Now that's something that's going to get their attention
It is.
because everyone wants to save money, right?
Yeah. Especially CFOs.
It speaks to a real pain point.
It does. And it broadens the appeal beyond just people who are actively looking for office equipment.
Yeah, it's like planting a seed, right?
It is.
Making them think about things they might not have even considered before.
Exactly. And that's the core of education-based marketing in action, right?
Okay.
You offer valuable education
Yeah.
to attract a wider pool of potential buyers.
And build that credibility, right?
Exactly. And Holmes puts it perfectly. He says, you will attract way more buyers if you are offering to teach them something of value to them than you will ever attract by simply trying to sell them your product or service.
It's like a complete paradigm shift from that traditional sales approach.
It is.
Instead of pushing your offering, you're pulling in those prospects by positioning yourself as a resource, as an expert.
Yeah, and building trust through that value.
And then you give that real-world example.
Right, with a multinational newspaper company.
Yeah, the one that was facing declining sales.
For 4 years straight.
That's a long time.
It is. And their previous strategy was all tactical.
Just cold calling, trying to sell ad space.
Right, and their circulation efforts were similar, just offering discounts, hoping to entice people.
They were reactive, only targeting people who were already showing some interest.
And totally missing out on cultivating new leads.
It's like they were fishing in a small pond when there was a whole ocean out there.
Exactly. So then this new CEO comes in, embodying that 1% executive mentality.
Okay.
And he completely shifts the strategy to education-based marketing.
So instead of just trying to sell ads, they started teaching local business owners how to be more successful.
Exactly. And even their opening line transformed, instead of launching into a sales pitch, it became, hi, I'm with XYZ Gazette. We've launched a new program focused on helping business owners in our community, like you, achieve greater success. Have you heard about it?
It's so much more inviting, right?
It is.
It's not about the newspaper's needs anymore. It's about the needs of those local businesses.
It's about providing value.
Yeah, and by doing that, they're naturally aligning their interests.
Exactly. And this program they developed, it covered things like the 5 most common reasons why businesses fail, and then 7 proven strategies to become the most popular type of business in their area.
So they were giving them real actionable advice?
They were, and they offered this free presentation.
Okay.
It was about 38 minutes long, but usually ran for an hour with questions.
An hour? That's pretty substantial.
It was. And they would do it either at the business owner's location or as a lunch and learn.
So they were making it really convenient.
Yeah. And the content of this educational session was so strategically chosen.
Like, what were they talking about?
They started with some general data on business success and failure rates.
Okay.
Like that 96% of businesses fail within the first 10 years.
Wow, that's a sobering statistic.
It is. And then 80% fail within the first 2 years.
I bet that gets their attention.
It does.
It makes them want to know more.
Right. And then they delve into those 5 common reasons for failure.
Yeah.
Things like poor customer relations, bad budgeting, lack of staff training, not anticipating market trend.
And the tie-in. Right.
Yeah. poor and inconsistent marketing.
Makes sense.
And they even cited sources like Entrepreneur Magazine.
So they weren't just making stuff up.
They were backing it up with data and credibility.
And then the final segment of the session.
They subtly transitioned into the power of marketing,
Okay.
comparing different options and highlighting the advantages of newspaper advertising.
Like what?
Things like its educated readership and its role as a driver of local commerce,
So they were positioning the newspaper as the solution.
but in a very subtle way.
Right, after they had already provided all of this valuable information.
Exactly.
I bet the business owners were receptive.
They were. By the end of the session, almost every business owner was interested in advertising.
That's incredible.
They felt informed and empowered, not pressured or sold to.
And Holmes's friend Andy Miller, he summed it up perfectly.
How so?
He said, when you sell, you break rapport, but when you educate, you build it.
That's a key takeaway, right?
Absolutely. It's a whole different way of thinking about sales.
It is. And Holmes goes on to list 13 different strategic objectives.
13.
Yeah, that were achieved through this approach.
Okay, like what?
So things like easier appointments, access to that huge 90% who weren't actively buying,
Right.
Positioning the salesperson as a trusted expert, giving more credibility to the sales materials, differentiating themselves from competitors, fostering brand loyalty.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is. Creating a sense of reciprocity where clients want to give back, teaching the importance of consistent advertising, framing it as a civic duty to support the community.
It's like a ripple effect.
It is. They even made the selling process much easier for the reps with a structured presentation, ensured that top management's key messages were consistently delivered, and even made the sales team themselves more knowledgeable and consultative.
It's incredible how many benefits they were able to achieve just by shifting their approach.
It is. And even if doing full-blown seminars isn't practical for every business,
Yeah.
Holmes's advice is to develop your own stadium pitch,
Okay.
which is that core story filled with valuable data.
So it's like a condensed version of the seminar.
It is. And then you equip your salespeople to deliver it.
So you're turning your sales team into educators.
Exactly. And he even addresses that potential resistance from salespeople who might be thinking, why am I teaching when I should be closing deals?
Right, because that's a common mindset.
It is. And it really highlights the leadership challenge of implementing a strategic change like this
Yeah, you need to be able to articulate those long-term benefits.
and provide the training and support to help the sales team embrace this new role as educators.
Because it's a different way of thinking.
It is. And then Holmes introduces this concept of aiming for the ultimate strategic position,
Okay.
which is shifting your focus from your internal USP, your unique selling proposition,
Yeah.
to an external one,
Meaning.
really dedicating yourself to the success of your clients.
So it's not just about what you offer.
It's about how you help them.
It's about their success.
Exactly. So for the newspaper company, this meant evolving their mission from reaching more people daily to helping businesses and consumers in our market live better lives.
That's a much more powerful statement.
It is. And of course, none of these strategic shifts will work without pig-headed discipline and determination.
You got to stick with it, yeah.
You do. Holmes emphasizes that even the regional presidents had to attend the education-based marketing training.
Wow. So the CEO is serious about this.
He was. It shows that leadership commitment.
Because if the leaders aren't on board, it's not going to trickle down.
Exactly. And then he even shows how the internet can be used for this.
Okay.
Like American Art Resources, they use webinars
Okay.
on the 5 most dangerous trends facing hospitals.
So they position themselves as knowledgeable about the challenges hospitals were facing.
Exactly. Beyond just selling art.
And that probably led to some really valuable conversations.
It did. And a lot of top-of-mind awareness.
People were thinking of them when it came time to make decisions.
Exactly. And then you have the shoe store example.
Okay.
They trained their salespeople extensively on feet, fashion, footwear.
Like giving them all the information they could possibly need.
Yeah. Like there are 214,000 nerve endings in your feet,
Wow, I didn't know that.
right? They talked about the amount of sweat your feet produce daily, the impact of shoe quality on foot health.
So they were turning their salespeople into experts.
They were. They even had in-store binders with all this information.
It's like they were creating a whole educational experience.
And it worked. They achieved those key strategic objectives like selling more premium shoes.
And building a reputation for expertise and customer care.
And Holmes argues that this stadium pitch, when it's done effectively, it becomes your core story
Okay.
because it provides compelling data that makes all of your marketing efforts work harder.
It's like a foundation for everything else you do.
And it subtly shapes the buying criteria in your favor.
Interesting.
Like he gives this example of an incentives company
Okay.
that offered education on 4 ways to increase profits, performance, and sales.
So they were educating their prospects about the power of incentives.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And by doing that, they were shifting the buying criteria towards recognizing the value of what they offered.
They were positioning themselves as the experts.
They were. And he emphasizes that market data, information about the buyer, their needs, their challenges.
Yeah.
It's much more persuasive than just talking about product features.
It's about speaking to their pain points.
Exactly. And he gives a couple more quick examples, like for tax research aids.
Yeah.
They shifted from saying, here's what our software does,
Okay.
to highlighting a market reality.
Which was?
The IRS requires these specific steps that you can't even bill your clients for, and our product significantly speeds up that non-billable work.
Ah, so they were speaking to a real problem.
And offering a solution.
That's smart.
And then for pictorial calendars,
Okay.
they used market data about where they sold best in bookstores.
Where was that?
By the registers at year-end.
Ah, impulse buys.
Right. And they compared that to mass merchants, where they were usually in the stationery aisle. And they found that they sold 40% higher per square inch when they were by the registers.
That's a significant difference.
It is. And by sharing this data with bookstore buyers,
they were able to get better placement.
Exactly. And their sales increased by 20%.
Wow, that's powerful.
It is. And the good news is that this kind of valuable market data is often readily available online.
Oh, really? Where can you find it?
Places like census.gov, reputable news sites like CNN.com.
Okay.
And if you need something more specialized,
Yeah.
there are firms like Empire Research Group that can compile it for you.
So the information is out there.
It is. The challenge is finding the right data.
And knowing how to apply it strategically.
Exactly. And that brings us to this concept of finding your smoking gun.
All right.
So Holmes defines this as a piece of irrefutable market data, or a powerful insight that just sets you apart from everyone else.
It's like that undeniable fact that makes your value proposition crystal clear.
And leaves your competitors struggling to counter it.
I like that.
So he uses this example of a lawn care service.
Oh.
And research revealed that homeowners could be held liable for workers' compensation
Okay.
if they hired uninsured individual workers and something went wrong on their property.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Right. So this became a huge smoking
Who
gun.
established lawn care companies?
Exactly.
Okay.
Because it introduced a significant risk factor.
That most people probably weren't aware of.
And suddenly, hiring that cheaper uninsured worker doesn't seem like such a good deal anymore.
It makes the professional service much more appealing.
Exactly. And the key to finding your own smoking gun, Holmes says, is to look at things over time.
Okay.
He gives this example of the gift shop industry,
Okay.
where the number of independent gift shops has declined significantly.
Really? By how much?
From 96,000 in 1998. Okay, so you've given us some really interesting stuff to dive into today. Excerpts from Chet Holmes, The Ultimate Sales Machine.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the book jacket calls him America's greatest business growth expert, which,
It's a bold claim, right?
yeah, but when you actually start looking at his ideas and, his philosophy, it actually, it really resonates.
It does.
It's all about focus.
Yes.
Honing in on those vital few skills that really make a difference rather than, spreading yourself too thin across a million different strategies.
Right, so we're basically looking at doing less, but doing it better.
Yeah.
Right, that's the immediate takeaway.
Yeah, and I think what's important to remember right from the start is that this isn't just about simplifying for the sake of it.
Yeah.
Holmes actually had this deep understanding of business growth.
Oh, yeah.
He worked as a corporate trainer and a strategic advisor with over 60 Fortune 500 companies.
Wow.
Huge names like Pacific Bell, NBC, Citibank, Warner Bros., and a ton more.
Yeah, I mean, that's a serious track record.
It is. And, he's designed hundreds of advertising campaigns and sales systems across all sorts of different industries.
I mean, it's clear that he really knows his